Hello, everyone. This is Charlie. This is the podcast called To Hell and Back, and it's July 3rd, 2025. And we're in the middle of a moment in the United States where the government is passing, literally today, uh, a huge bill to support Donald Trump's agenda. And it's been incredibly contentious. And I want to make some comments about it, things I've been thinking about, alongside everyone else who's thinking about these things. So I just want to share with you a certain construction of what's happening that I've come to up to this moment, and that suggests to me what directions might make a difference going forward. First, as you know, I called this podcast Amputation of Morality, because from my perspective, uh, one of the most baffling things going on, perplexing things, troubling things, really outrageous things, is that it seems that a large percentage of the country, in following Donald Trump, have had an amputation between themselves and their morality. Uh, what do I mean? I mean, when it comes to Donald Trump's inner circle of people in the government, and then the entire Republican uh, Congress, Senate, and House of Representatives, what kind of people would vote in favor of eliminating or reducing food for hungry, impoverished children? What kind of people would vote for eliminating the health care of 10 to 15 million Americans? If you get down to watching each one of them, these are stunning and striking, disturbing things that anybody with a sort of aware of their morality and their humanity couldn't possibly manage to do. What kind of people would be so aggressively interested in blocking all immigration and in deporting people to countries that they've never been to before, where known mistreatment is going on? Oh, what kind of people would want to build cages or camps or detention centers or whatever you call them, uh, and then post photographs of hundreds of detained people, mostly people of color from other countries, uh, inside those cages? What is that we've gotten to at this point? Um, and what kind of people would consciously vote to end aid programs that are literally keeping millions of children alive in the world, and at the same time be axing programs for health research into all kinds of conditions and epidemics and social conditions? I mean, what is this? I mean, this is this is just a different world than what I thought I was growing up in when I was a boy in Oregon, and the values that it seemed to me everybody had at that point. Certainly, anybody who spoke up had. I mean, the values of when you were kids being taught to, uh, on May Day, May 1st every year, make little baskets of flowers and deliver them to neighbors' doors and things like that. And to take pride in being an American citizen that values liberty and justice and fairness for all, like Superman, truth and justice for all, and the American way. I mean, the American way has just become a different way now. How did this? I mean, there's lots of. I'm not a historian, and there are people out there explaining how this has happened over the last 45 years. that I'm very interested in, and but I'm not the expert in. I'm not going to talk more about this. I do have some expertise when it comes to psychological understanding of some situations and psychosocial understanding. So that's what I'm going to be relying on here to talk about how it is that people are doing what we're doing that result in a vote like happened today and other things that have been going on. So, what do I think? First of all, I certainly don't have the perspective that this is all because of one man, Donald Trump, even though I do have things to say about him that are not unique. I do think this is the product of the unfolding of a dramatic, complex social system situation with many different players. And for me, breaking down what is that narrative? What is the story that's going on? Who are playing the various roles in this story? And are there any places within this story where I can see that things might end up improving to the point where we would sort of like treat this disorder in our country of the amputation of morality? So I have two models in mind at the same time. They kind of come down to spelling out about the same six roles, but two models, you might say two metaphors of what's going on in our government and in the populace at large. So let me take you through them. The first one I'm not going to say too much more about, but it's absolutely in parallel with the second one. So one is that this is, as many people have written about, there's the what's happened with the Trump administration is a little bit like the running of a mob operation. And there's a mob boss, obviously Trump, and there's the inner circle of people, and there are the victims that are involved, and there are the enablers on the sidelines, there are the people in the family, there are the people who wish they could get a piece of the action, there are the people who don't know much about it, but they think something's wrong, and then there are the actual people who are trying to call out crime and victimization and do something about it. Um, there's sort of that whole model. And certainly there are a lot of parallels with the way that Trump and his inner circle operate. And there's a kind of a bullying mentality of we are the biggest guys on the playground and we are going to beat the shit out of everybody else. And we're going to run them out of here. And if they don't want to be part of our mob, then they're dead. They're done. They're out of this country. They're in cages. And even people, I mean, this goes back to my comments before. What kind of people in America want to find naturalized citizens, people who are actually citizens of the United States, who went through that process, to find them, root them out, and victimize them and send them out of the country? Yes, have some committed crimes, I'm sure. Have more of them committed crimes than most people in general? I doubt it. But anyway, there's that. So, so that's one model, and it isn't like I know that model as well as some people who study the mob or who know about the mafia and things like that. I'm very second-handish about that, but I'll tell you where I'm first-handish is the number of cases in my world as a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist where I have seen unsavory, immoral actions going on within a family, within a household, and how that works. So I just think there's an uncanny resemblance between these situations that I'm going to talk a little about and what's going on in these sort of like huge drama in the United States. So what is this? I'm talking about the family in which most commonly the way this works is there's a father who is sexually abusing a daughter, could be a son, could be a mother victimizing a daughter or a son. More commonly, it's a father victimizing a daughter. And he's telling the daughter that what he's doing is in her best interest. one way or another. But it's obviously totally to meet his own needs and to exercise power and authority, and to be a bully and to be threatening. And so this situation in families happens every day and is very ugly and is very devastating for the people involved. So let me say a little more about this. I'm going to mention a particular family. Many, many, many years ago, when I was developing psychiatric hospital program in the hospital in White Plains, New York, based on dialectical behavior therapy. I was the chief of the unit, chief of the program, and there was a chief social worker named Perry Hoffman. Perry, who went on to develop, who became the director and CEO of the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder, otherwise known as NEABPD, and who developed family connections programs along with Alan Frazzetti. Well, in that hospital program where I developed DBT in the hospital, and Perry worked with me along with other people, Perry and I were running a Thursday night weekly group for the family members of the patients in our program. Now, we had 18 patients in the hospital, all with diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And we had a multiple family group where family members were invited to meet with us on Thursday nights, not with the patients from the hospital. It was for the people in the community. And we ran a program that we thought we tried to be very supportive. We tried to elicit information, questions. We tried to educate them. We tried to give advice, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was a supportive multiple family therapy group. At a certain moment in time, whether this came from Perry or myself, I can't remember, but it was between the two of us. We had a discussion that we thought of changing the agenda of our meeting to focus largely on actually just teaching the same DBT skills to family members as we taught to the patients in the hospital. This was, I'm almost certain, the first DBT family skills group in the world, since this was early in the days of there being any DBT at all outside of Seattle, and they weren't doing it in Seattle. So we switched over our model to just teach skills. And whereas before we switched, there would be 6 or 7 families would be represented in this group meeting. After the switch, several weeks later, it had grown to where 17 or 18 families were represented in these meetings. In other words, it became very popular. And when it did become popular, there was another thing that became noticeable. Not only did the family members find it valuable to just be directly taught the skills so that they could understand what was being taught to their relative in the hospital, but also they were finding they were incredibly helpful for themselves, how to regulate their own feelings, how to regulate their own thinking, how to regulate their own relationships, and how to stabilize their lives. But then there was one more thing that was very interesting. It became noticeable to both Perry and myself that people seemed to be sharing more in this skills-oriented meeting of the kind of personal, sensitive, authentic information about themselves and their families than they used to share with us when we were actually directly asking for that kind of information. We weren't asking for that as much, but actually, I think by just teaching skills, we created a safe atmosphere and a purposeful atmosphere and a protective atmosphere in a way that made people just feel more comfortable just spontaneously sharing things that we weren't even asking about. And one day that happened with one of our people. There was a woman there whose daughter whose adult daughter was a patient in our hospital program. And that adult daughter was probably in her late 20s at the time. And she had made suicide attempts and harming herself, had a lot of dysregulation of her emotions. And in treatment, both in individual therapy as well as in group meetings, she would allege that her father had sexually abused her when she was a child, and that no one knew it and no one believed it when she brought it up. And she was devastated by that. And from her point of view, that's why she was, I don't know, couldn't manage her life and was wanting to be dead. Um, Her mother was in this family group. And one evening, her mother said, I want to say something to the group. And so either Perry or I said, yeah, go ahead. And she then, in a way that was replete with tears, explained that her daughter has been saying for years that she was sexually abused by her father. And the mother said, and I've never supported her allegations. I've tried never to comment on them. I've stayed on the sidelines. But I want to tell everyone in this group right now, I've made a decision to tell everybody, I know that it's true. My husband did have sexual relationships with my daughter, and it was devastating to her. And I knew it was happening, and I couldn't do anything about it. I would literally be in the next room and it would be happening, and I would know it was happening, and I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't even mention it to my husband. My husband was a well-known professional in our local community. He was admired by many people. He was involved in humanitarian projects. People saw him as a kind of like a great guy. And I knew this about him, but I couldn't bring it up to him. I was afraid of him. I was afraid what he would do to me. I was afraid what it could do to his reputation. I was afraid that it could bring down the whole family. And I just lived with it. And I am so regretful and I am so devastated that I did this. And she said, and it's not only that. And she had trouble getting all of this out between the tears. And she said, the other thing is that I know also that he had sex with my other two daughters when they were children, also. All three daughters. And I knew it. And the other two didn't end up trying to kill themselves. I don't know how they have handled this, but I never said a word to anybody about any of it until right now. So this is a scenario I'm talking about. There's a certain ugly scenario that happens in a lot of families, believe it or not. Maybe you believe it, maybe you don't, depending how much you know about this, but it happens a lot. And it happens and it often has devastating outcomes. And there are certain roles involved when this happens. It's never just, probably never just one person doing bad things, one person amputated from his own capacity for morality, his capacity for empathy with respect to his own children. There's a whole panoply of things going on. So that's what I want to talk about now, is that there are roles when that happens. And it just occurred to me in the past week or two as I thought more about this. I know this picture of Donald Trump and his inner circle and the surrounding admirers and the people who don't know what's going on and the opposition and the victims. I know this story, but it's in this case, it's the story of incest and the devastation of somebody's life and the victimization of somebody's life by a powerful figure. So what are these? Basically, I'm going to name 6 roles that all kind of come together that are often involved in what goes on with a family like this and what's going on in the United States. Role number one, there's a perpetrator, there's an individual. Obviously, what I'm saying about this with Donald Trump is that Donald Trump is the perpetrator. He's the chief perpetrator. There are other sort of chief perpetrators with him, but he's obviously the head of the vanguard of this and the leader of the way. And we know a lot about Donald Trump for decades. People have reported on him, talked about him. In psychiatry, people are advisedly and understandably reluctant to diagnose somebody who they've never met. But by this point in time, I'll just say this about it without making a diagnosis. You know, there's Donald Trump fits the profile of a severe narcissistic personality disorder of the grandiose type. There are two types at this moment in history that are mainly looked at of narcissistic personality disorder. One type is the grandiose type, where everything becomes, I am the smartest, I am the greatest, I am a genius, I am in charge. There's nobody like me. Other people are extensions of me, and if they aren't extensions of me, or if they aren't loyal to me, then they either don't exist or shouldn't exist, or they're just assholes, or they're stupid, or they're jerks, or they're ugly, and all kinds of demeaning attributions of other people. The person who has narcissistic features has all those qualities. The grandiose narcissist sort of sees other people as either loyal to him and therefore on the right track, and he empowers them and they empower him. And there's a kind of like an agreement, unwritten agreement between them that we're going to support each other through this. Then there's this whole world of people outside that inner circle that might raise questions, might get in the way, might insult, might do something that interferes with the full exercise of the authority that the grandiose narcissist feels entitled to. And those people that get in the way then become the objects of scorn and humiliation and devaluation and abuse of different kinds. And of course, we see that with Donald Trump. It's unquestionable that we see that with Donald Trump, even up to yesterday, when with a member of Congress who's unbelievably articulate constitutional lawyer, Jamie Raskin from Maryland, that Donald Trump insults him by saying he has an ugly face, and along with some other things he said about him. And he's always saying people are stupid. This one's stupid. This one's stupid. So there is this narcissistic features of this person who sees himself as entitled to be essentially like the king, essentially like the mob boss, essentially in charge, essentially that other people are there for him. And if they aren't there for him, they either don't count or they're against him. And the ones who don't count are just sort of a shadowy, distant group out there of people who really don't matter. So there's the perpetrator, and the perpetrator in these kind of cases often does have this kind of grandiose flair of the world is my oyster. This is my castle. I am the king of my castle. I can do whatever the hell I want in my castle, and nobody better get in the way. And so we've got the perpetrator profile. Whether or not he engaged in sexual abuse of his children is another question. I don't have any reason to think that he did from anything I've ever read or heard. But I'm saying that the profile of how he behaves and how he does victimize people, often unseen victims, fits this idea. Of course, in addition to that, he actually has been adjudicated as a felon with a sexual abuse record behind him, and he's been accused by multiple women of sexually abusive behavior that just never made it to that level of being adjudicated. So there is a whole trail going back into his early adult life of victimizing women and having this kind of aura, self-generated aura of being a powerful, a successful businessman genius who's entitled to women, who's entitled to money, who's entitled to power, and that authorizes him to basically treat other people like dirt. Um, and somehow it takes the form, has taken the form in his case, of over and over again in his life of him trashing people of color, not only women in various ways, but people of color specifically and people from other countries specifically. So we have the perpetrator. That's role number one. This is Donald Trump's role in this play, this sort of play, this morality play or this amorality play. And so we see that. Role number two, the victims. In this case, I'm not claiming that there's victims within the family in that particular way, though my guess is that there are different kinds of victims within the family that one wouldn't hear about at this point in time because they're part of the inner circle and they're part of people who live with fear of him and desires for power and ambition themselves. But anyway, you've got victims out there. Victims of are people who he trashes, who he devalues, who he moves to do things to hurt, who he files lawsuits against. Victims right now include people that are people of color, people from other countries, people who are poor, people who are soldiers that he makes fun of. As if they are miserable wretches for having gone to fight for this country. Um, and and now also people who don't have enough food, uh, uh, people who now will be stripped of health care. Uh, and how does he think about these things? Do you think he ever wakes up at night, ever sits around during the day thinking, oh my God, this is really terrible what we're doing here. It's really unfortunate. I don't even think he gives any impression that he thinks that it's unfortunate that people are going to lose health care because of him. The loss of health care for many families is going to be literally devastating, the beginning of the end. But I don't think it weighs on him. I think that there's a lack of morality, a lack of compassion, a lack of remorse for the behaviors. In that respect, it goes along with the narcissistic personality profile with some antisocial features, or what other people have also called malignant narcissism. So you've got a perpetrator and you've got victims, and many of the victims are unknown, unseen, unrepresented. They are not in positions very well to fight for themselves. They're just trying to fight to stay alive. They're trying to fight to keep enough money to pay their bills. And many people are going to be added to this crew of victims over the coming years as a result of decisions that have just been made. Role number three is the inner circle. This includes enablers. In that category with Donald Trump, that includes people who actually after the insurrection of January 6th, when he had lost the election to Biden, that actually after that insurrection basically came out against Trump, said what he did was terrible, that he should have done lots of things that he didn't do, and that he should not hold this kind of office ever again. And some of those people end up right back in the camp, in the inner circle camp, either within Congress or within the cabinet or among lawyers. But anyway, there's this whole panoply of players that you might say are the enablers because they see him rising to power again They see the power of his charisma in relation to people in the country, and they get on board. It's like, okay, I want power too. I have ambition too. I don't want to be left out of this gravy train myself. I want to be with these rich guys, these billionaires, which is where things are going. And Donald Trump is my ticket. And if I turn on him, he'll turn on me, and I will be out in the cold, out in the dark, and my ambitions will be dashed, and this is my country, and I would like to be up there in the inner circle. So there's a whole potion of the power of ambition and the power of envy and the power of entitlement uh, that can amputate somebody from what might have been some core of human decency and morality and concern about fellow human beings and fairness, the rule of law and justice, that these things just get disconnected from the person. And the person is now a kind of a mini me of Donald Trump, actually mimicking things he says to sound like him or to say the same words or to be clearly on the same boat and to tweet things that'll make it clear that they are with him, not against him. So, so we have three roles so far, right? We have Donald Trump, we have the perpetrator, the powerful bully perpetrator. Then we have the victims, the kind of unrepresented in the shadows victims, people going under as a result of what's happening. Then we have the enablers, who are the equivalent in that family where there's incest, of the ones like the mother, who, in that case, who know that something's going on, but they have fear in that case, which is one of the big motivators to stay quiet, to ignore it, to be blind, sort of like voluntary blindness is going on in the inner circle. To the degree that it takes over so much that I think for many of them, I just think this is their nature at this point. Whatever they were in the past or whatever their previous generations that they came from, where there may have been shreds of decency and even more than that, they've been overtaken by this sickness, and it is their driving motivational force. And they, as part of their viewpoint about the world, they start to come out against diversity, against inclusion, against equality, DEI. They come out against all these things, lump them together in a derogatory way, calling them wokeism, and then attack wokeism and try to strip the world of wokeism, which is essentially stripping the world of empathy, stripping the world of humanity, and stripping the world of people caring about people, people cooperating with people, people trusting each other, and people making it so that life is better for everybody. That goes out and is given a negative name and is attacked overtly under the name of wokeism, and so that enablers, there's aggressive enablers and then there's silent enablers, and the aggressive enablers are out there doing the bidding of the perpetrator. The silent enablers are the ones who are just sort of by keeping to themselves but being quiet and maintaining a kind of voluntary blindness about what's going on and not speaking up and not saying anything, because the environment is so harsh up there in the inner circle about what's allowable, and gradually is getting harsher, spreading out beyond the inner circle into the United States and into the world, to the point where very reasonable, intelligent people who have things to offer to the United States are frightened about coming to the United States, frightened about passing through passport control and customs, to where they might be asked to show their cell phone, and then they might be asked to show their social media so that the people can, as extensions of the administration, can try to seek out those who have dissenting viewpoints about anything and catch them before they get into the country and label them and victimize them. So that's what's going on. And the enablers, there's the silent enablers, the blinding enablers, the quiet enablers, and then there's the aggressive enablers that are out there, following the orders of people like Steve Miller, who seems to be the most aggressive enabler of all, but also Russell Vought, who was one of the authors of the Project 2025 and one of the people ensuring that it takes place in the Office of Management and Budget. Role number 4, you get outside the inner circle. So in this case, I'm talking about in our government, outside the cabinet, outside the inner circle at the White House, outside the Republicans in Congress, who are in lockstep at this point, part of the inner circle. It's a stunning spread of amputation going on from the center outward to all of these Republicans. And then you get in beyond the halls of Congress, beyond Washington, D.C. You have different groups. So this next role I'm just called the admirers. These are the people in the country who say, well, Donald Trump is a successful businessman. Donald Trump has promised to make our lives better and reduce the prices in our lives, reduce our taxes, take away the people who are competing for our jobs, meaning the people of color and people from other countries, the immigrants, that building a wall, he's protecting us. There's the people who admire him for his charisma and the way he says what he thinks in the front of an audience and has such a quick tongue about these kind of things and can have a sense of humor, sort of, and all of this kind of stuff that he puts himself forward as the champion of the unrepresented. It's always been so ironic to realize that the policies he actually is in favor of absolutely devastate the unrepresented, devastate those who have lost out in the last 45 years as their families have gone from being in the center of the middle class, able to afford houses and cars and things like that, to where they can barely make it and now may lose health care too if they haven't already. So it's kind of like, wow, the admirers are out there because they have hope. Admiration is coming from, this guy is going to save us. This guy is our champion. It may be weird to think he's our champion because he lives like a king and he acts like a king and he's very wealthy, or at least he claims to be extremely wealthy, and he's making himself wealthier every day. And I'm not. I'm actually going gradually under. But God damn it, he's going to save us and he is our salvation. So there is this kind of sense of looking up to Donald Trump being just amazing if you get a chance to get his signature. Even the people in the inner circle in the Congress, Trump gives them mementos of himself, fragments of himself, signatures of himself on their stuff, memorabilia, and they treasure it. They take it. It's sort of like God has spoken, Trump has spoken, our Savior has spoken. And it sort of takes the amputation of morality and turns it into a new God of some kind that is beyond reproach. And so there are the admirers in the world, and that includes, we don't know exactly how many people, but by all the polls over the years that go on, this is somewhere between 30 and 40% of people that are pretty much there for him no matter what. And then there'll be another role. So now we've got perpetrator, we've got victim, we've got the sort of quiet and not so quiet enablers. We've got the admirers in the kingdom. And now we've got the kind of neutral parties in the kingdom. I'm not sure what to call these people, but it's a huge amount of people. And it's like most people in the country who are not his admirers, but they also aren't his opposition. And so there are people out there trying to get by, trying to make it, just thinking, what are we doing tomorrow? How are we going to get by? I don't have time for this political shit that's going on. And I try to follow it from a distance, but maybe there's good things about what he's doing. Maybe there's bad things about what he's doing, but it wouldn't be any worse than what the other guys do. And it's kind of like people who are sort of like here and there in between, and they might very well have their doubts about what's going on. They might have misgivings about what's going on. But somehow those doubts and misgivings get kind of appeased and normalized. Like, all right, well, we're unhappy with everybody that kind of like, who can be a perfect president and a perfect administration? There's nobody. The other guys were just as bad in different ways. There's a certain way of kind of like, what is that? Regression to the mean or something like, and like just coming down to, this isn't that bad. This isn't that bad. This isn't that bad. Or it isn't because of this, or it isn't because of him, or it isn't because of these policies, or it isn't because of those people. It's kind of like there's always a kind of like an explanation. And that's a large part of the country. And I'm going to come back to where I think differences can be made. So that's a huge group. That may be in the 30 to 40%, something like that. How many independents, people who are politically classified as independents, are in that group versus the last group I'm going to mention, which is the opposition, is going to turn out to be very important. So now there's the opposition. So now there's the people out there that see the corruption, that see the loss of morality, that see the inhumanity from man to man that's going on, reinforced constantly by this administration and put in place by this administration. It's sort of like that's going on all the time, where you've got people who are show up for protest, people who are looking for roles to take to try to stop this amoral machine, and bring it down and try to find something better. There's that opposition, and I don't know how many that is, but I'm going to guess in the 10 to 20% or something like that, that are actually actively like that. And it certainly has grown over time in the past few months since Trump came in. But there is a way that things are reported in the news, in all kinds of news media, that make everything kind of balance out with each other, make things not look as bad as they are. You have to look actually at what's going on. Like you have to look in that family of the professional who is admired, who is seen as a good guy. Look into his family and look at secretly things that are happening literally in the bedrooms and see what's happening to the lives of the victims to realize, holy shit, this is a really bad thing going on here. This is not just sort of like political history happening that you can sort of take a distance from. This is the devastation of people's lives when it doesn't have to be that way. When it wasn't actually that way, there was always some devastation going on. It always needs attention. But the direction that things are going has just been to bring down the hammer harder and harder and harder against those who have the hardest time in life already, and to exaggerate the inequalities between those who have and those who have not. So we've got 6 roles now. We've got a perpetrator. We've got victims. We've got the inner circle of enablers, some of whom are aggressive and some of whom are just benign, blind, voluntarily blind people. We've got the admirers in the kingdom. We've got the sort of neutral parties in the kingdom who don't keep their eye fully on what's going on, aren't that fully informed enough. I mean, it's hard to be fully informed enough unless you're right in the middle of these things. And then there's the opposition who are really outraged by what's going on, the kind of attempt to preserve humanity. So if you see it the way I see it, if you see these parties and you start thinking, okay, what can change? In the next 2 years, 4 years, what can change? How can we improve this situation? And if you look at role by role, since all six roles play a part, play an active part every day, role number one, the perpetrator, I don't think there's much hope. I could be wrong. He could wake up one morning and think differently about things because he's obsessed with the idea of someday having a Nobel Peace Prize so that he can rival Barack Obama, who drives him crazy by how effective he was and how popular he was. I mean, he's envious, which is also part of the narcissistic condition. And so, yeah, maybe he'll do some things that look better. But at the core, this man is deeply disconnected from anything you would call ordinary human morality. So I don't have much hope that he'll change. Maybe he'll die. Maybe something will happen to him. I mean, he is almost 80 years old, and he is always in the public eye. There's always something could happen to him. But for the moment, I'd have to say that I don't look to him as a source of hope for change. If anything, he seems to go in the other direction. Secondly, the inner circle, the close-in enablers, aggressive and otherwise. There's some hope there in that sometimes here and there, it's just not a big hope, but here and there, there'll be someone in the inner circle who then speaks up, speaks out, calls out that the emperor has no clothes. The recent decision by the senator from North Carolina, Tillis, after Trump said he was going to do what he could to get this guy beat in his next primary election because the guy wasn't signing on to Trump's bill. And the guy said, "Well, I'm not going to run again." And he came out with a fiery and a very effectively articulated speech in the Senate about what's going on. So he became a kind of I don't know, a certain kind of whistleblower within the inner circle because he was an inner circle kind of guy. He had been, I think he had been the leader of the House of Representatives at one point, and he was a highly liked senator who really thought things through for himself and who saw the devastation coming to North Carolina citizens due to the changes that were going to come in the bill that was just passed. So yeah, there's people like that. There are people who there's Liz Cheney. There's other people now and then who've been in the kind of upper echelons of power and the inner circle, and they've been enablers up to a certain point, and then they somehow convert. They see the light. I never know exactly why. Maybe it was a dinner table conversation with a family member. Maybe it's something that happened to one of their constituents. Maybe it's just that they woke up one day and realized I've lost touch with who I used to be. Whatever it is, now and then. So you get little here and there, like little light bulbs coming on now and then among the inner circle. But you know what? There's not going to be much of that. There hasn't been much of that. There isn't much of that. The inner circle is characterized by people who are motivated by very powerful emotions, ambition, envy, and fear. And it's very hard once they're in. They're partway in or they're in. They've tasted something of the power. They've shared something of the power. They've gotten the blessing of the perpetrator. And once they take one bite of that apple, the rest of the apple is right there and very hard for them to let go. Um, it's just sort of it's that aphorism: when you give an inch, they'll take a mile. When you start to compromise your morals, your values, your standards, what you think, and you go along with somebody because of fear or because you want a little piece of the power, and you sell out a little bit, thinking that's all you're going to sell out. It doesn't work that way. Usually you're there and you sell out, and especially with someone like Donald Trump, then that lasts for one day, but tomorrow he's going to expect more from you. He's going to expect loyalty, what he calls loyalty, blind obedience. Um, so it's hard once you're in those positions to get people to get out of those. So you always hope for people there to wake up, see the light, make a statement, make a decision, maybe not quit, maybe stay, but you don't stay very long in that situation without getting pushed out. So, not much hope for the inner circle. The Steve Millers, the Russell Vaughts, there are lots of other people, the current press secretary, Carolyn Levitt. These people are like in there. They're stuck in there. Uh, so I don't see much hope in trying to work with them, and except when there is a little bit of willingness and openness where you see that it's coming. So what about the victims themselves? Yes, the victims could play a role here in making a difference. How could the victims play a role? With the help of people that are the opposition, if they can increasingly bring to the attention again and again and again in public and make it visible what's going on with the victimization, it'll be harder for some of the neutral people in the kingdom to tolerate it. Might even turn some of the people who are admirers into non-admirers. But it's one place, so just yesterday I was watching an interview of Pete Buttigieg interviewing a woman from North Carolina who has twins, who need severe, intense medical care for severe medical conditions, who are about to lose that medical care because they'll lose Medicaid, and there's not a replacement for that, and the kids will go under. And just to have her actually interviewed and have it put out there in public, so that you can actually identify with the victim. You can actually see, oh my God. So the more the victim's stories of their actual circumstances of their lives and the actual impact of the decisions being made, the more those can be out there for people. Of course, the people who don't want to see those things won't see them. But there may be some people in that neutral middle ground, and some of the people who are maybe political independents who say, oh my God, that poor woman, those poor children, does this have to be? Do these people realize that making these decisions about Medicaid and supplement and food stamps are going to make this huge difference in this family's life? The more that can become like as if that's happening to someone in your own house or a neighbor, the better. So victims could play a role here, but victims will need help in playing that role. And of course, if victims come out and make themselves visible, they might make themselves more victimizable. So it's not easy. The next category, the next role is the admirers. There's some hope for the admirers in that they are often admirers without much data. They don't know what's going on. So maybe if the admirers are more exposed to actually what's happening and what the impact actually is in reality, the more they're exposed to reality, maybe that'll help them shift a little bit, even a little bit, maybe enough so that an election makes a difference. But might make a difference for the admirers to start to say, well, maybe I haven't been quite right about this, because the admirers are not as deep in as the enablers. The enablers have already sold part of their soul. The admirers might not have. They're kind of out in their communities living their lives. And they just think this is a great man and he's doing great things and he's going to bring down the price of eggs and he's going to bring down this and he's going to get rid of that and he's going to make life better and safer and it's going to be a make America great again. It's going to be great. All of this stuff, the admirers buy that stuff without necessarily having much exposure to the reality of the impact, especially the victims, the impact on victims. So, yeah, um, the admirers might turn. So I wouldn't give up on the admirers the way I've kind of given up on the perpetrator and the enablers. And by the way, some of those enablers, when I just said that, I realized, what about that woman whose husband had sex with her daughters? I mean, she was an enabler. She was not an aggressive enabler. She was not an enabler who was doing the bidding of the perpetrator, but she was allowing the perpetrator. She was not calling out the perpetrator primarily due to fear, fear for herself, fear for her family, fear for his reputation, and all these things that she was protecting, which she regrets deeply later. So it might be that some of the enablers that they actually are more in her category rather than the Steve Miller category of people who just are finding that this is their playground where they get to be as aggressive as they want to be. So then you've got the neutral party out there. And this is where the biggest possibility is, I think, for change, and especially if they get exposed to what's going on with the victims. If you could bring the neutral people, that what I guessed are in the 30% range, or something like that, 35% of people who are kind of out there. They're not in favor of the administration. They don't know what to think exactly about it. They're kind of in a wishy-washy position. Some things get normalized. They really can't quite apply themselves to it, but they're distressed by it, and they think something not great is going on. The more the story can be spelled out of what's happening to the victims and the perpetration and the loss of morality and some of the stunning things that are being decided in these ways, the more they can get hold of that story and identify with it, the more chance there is that they will stand up at some point and join the opposition. And at the very least, that when they go into the voting booth in November of 2026 and beyond, that they will think about these things and think, you know what? We should probably be shifting gears here and going to people who are not part of the perpetrator's agenda. And so there's a chance there with those people, but they need to be exposed to reality, exposed to what's happening to their neighbors, their friends, their families, the people who live across the country who they don't even know yet, but maybe they can be brought to know those people. Maybe there should be a victim channel of some kind where people like Pete Buttigieg and others are who are part of the opposition and who are intelligent are interviewing people and exposing what's going on in this way. Of course, the only ones who will watch this will be people who might already feel like it might be true, but that might be some of those people in that neutral territory. And then the final group is the opposition, the 10 to 20% of people that are opposing. I mean, it was 5% of America that turned out for protests a few weeks ago. That was 5% who are literally able to go out on the streets and stuff. So that suggests to me that, 10% or 10% plus of people are actually against what's going on. And the polls are increasingly showing that. So the polls are going in the right direction from my point of view. So this is it. I don't know if this contributes anything to your thinking, but I just need ways when something like this is going on that's troubling and it's kind of going in the wrong direction, and I'm so distressed about it. It takes me a while to just kind of come up with a scorecard, a playbook, a set of pathways, ways to think about it, to think about what could make a difference, and to justify that certain things need to be done. They need to be done and again and again and again, in order to change the outcome of this equation. which has been so disturbing. And I've only begun to touch, as you know, on things that are troubling about this. I mean, I went to Harvard University, and what has been done to attack Harvard and other universities in the university system, University of Virginia as well now, but universities in general, is just devastating. It's just disturbing. It's just anti everything that I grew up thinking that we all believed in. So that's it for today. That's it from me. Please let me know if you found this helpful. Please leave comments for me where you watch or listen to this podcast, uh, and or write me through my website, charlieswenson.com, or directly to my email at the letter C, robert.swenson@gmail.com. I deeply appreciate any input and feedback. I always do, even if I don't get back to you. Believe me, I am reading every word and I appreciate it, and it does affect me. So be well, take care. Tomorrow's the 4th of July. Let's try to go into it thinking that actually there is hope for America in this dark moment. Thank you all. Bye.